Hey, everybody, welcome back to your favorite episode, You're Free to Go. Guy Fronstin here with attorney Marc Nurik. Marc, happy to have you in the studio.
Good to be back.
I know, it's been a few episodes where you've been out in LA
Yeah,
recording.
I needed the rain, so I came back.
Yeah, Florida never stops raining. Well, certainly June, July, August. Yeah, we love having you here. And the timing couldn't be better because we have 3 episodes in a row with great experts that are going to be our guests. So super excited. We're going to jump right into it today, talking about actually a topic that we probably should have talked about 43 episodes ago, when it's a topic of cyber security and data privacy. It's, everyone nowadays is being affected by this. It's a real risk to companies, to individuals, and it's a real concern out there. So it's super timely, and it's more timely because in one of our recent episodes, maybe 1 or 2 episodes ago, we talked about a friend of mine who got scammed on the phone, and we wound up riffing over that back and forth, the two of us, for a full hour, of how people get scammed. So super excited today to have this timely episode about cybersecurity and data privacy. And in fact, I had about 6 years ago a case in another state with a police department. My client was looking at 15 years in prison, and I wind up winning a motion to dismiss. It's the only case I've ever argued and won a motion to dismiss, especially looking at 15 years in prison, where I wasn't thanked afterwards by the client. So I was a little disappointed. But why didn't they thank me? Because it was a slam dunk, this motion to dismiss. That police department actually had their entire system hacked. All of the evidence in their criminal system was hacked, and at the prosecutor's office. And so they had a decision to make. Do we pay the ransom to the people hacking us, or do we say, screw off, take a hike, we don't care, we're going to go, we're not going to pay you guys, get out of our way. And they did. They said, we're not paying for this, and they figured out a way. But as a result of not paying them, they never got the data back. They didn't get the evidence in the cases. And
it was just more than your one client.
Yeah, it was their entire database, and they tried to recapture, and they did a lot of cases, but mine was about one of 25% of the cases that got lucky. My client got lucky, where they just didn't have enough anymore to prove the case, and they actually dismissed it, which was pretty interesting, obviously. And I had another case where there was, you may have been part of this too, was in Broward. They got hit by a horrible flood. And it was in the days 20 years ago when all the records were in paper. So it wasn't cyber hacking or anything. But I remember that case where they lost some files because of a major flood, and they wound up...
well, this is a great segue to our guest today.
Right.
So why don't you introduce her?
Okay, well, she is one of, if not the most knowledgeable and experienced cybersecurity and data privacy protection attorneys in the entire country. I'm going to just briefly go into her resume. First of all, Marc, she has more initials after her name. Her name is Blair Dawson. MS, CYS, FIP, CIP, US, CIPPE. This woman has so many credentials, and she's a member.
I wish we had the time to find out what they were.
Yeah, we wouldn't even understand them, I don't think. But she's at a very respected law firm out of Chicago, McDonald Hopkins. She's represented companies in the private sector, public sector, and she basically is going to talk today about ransom negotiations, forensic investigations, dealing with law enforcement, how to avoid future attacks, for your company, which is obviously everyone's going to want to listen to that. She's developed cyber incident response policies and protocols, and she's a distinguished member of so many societies. I can't even list them all. But 2 other things I want to mention. She's an adjunct professor at the Northwestern Pritzker School of Law, which is one of the top schools in the country. And she teaches to lawyers regularly. And she's been awarded, recognized as Cybersecurity Docket's Incident Response Elite, as well as SIA Women in Security and Forum. She is by far one of the leading, certainly one of, if not the leading experts as an attorney in this field. And I'm so happy, we are so happy to welcome Blair Dawson today to our show. And we're glad that you're here and you're taking the time to be with us and our listeners today, Blair. Welcome.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me. And thanks for those kind words. I really appreciate the introduction.
I could have gone another 45 minutes on the intro. Marc made me cut it down, Marc. He's always giving me problems.
Well, I want to hear from Blair.
Yeah, that's a good point. Our listeners want to hear.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so why don't we start with Blair? Why don't you just give a little bit of your background and kind of how you got into this special niche and whatever you feel like sharing, and then we'll just have a back and forth conversation.
Oh, absolutely. So I definitely hit my stride when I went into data privacy. I had started the first 20 years or so of my career doing professional liability with Lloyd's in London. And part of that was the very infant cybersecurity sublimits on certain policies, like management liability policies. And nobody knew what it was. Nobody knew what to do with it. Nobody made claims on it. And that's evolved into its own standalone industry, not just with insurance, certainly, but with all of the different support. There's a few firms that deal in data privacy, a smaller group of those firms, a subset, that do what I do with incident response. And then a whole host in that ecosystem of other vendors, from the forensic investigators, the threat actor negotiators, and all of that. So I feel very fortunate that the evolution of my career slid into data privacy. I'm definitely a person that likes putting fires out, being available at all hours in order to help clients with crises. And that's what I do day to day. I feel so grateful that I'm in that space. And as your introduction suggests, I live and breathe this, and I really enjoy speaking about it. So again, I'm so grateful to be here with you and your audience.
And I imagine it's growing like crazy. You know, the whole internet world and everything's growing so fast. Not only growing, but growing fast. How do you keep up with the growth and the changes? You know, a lot of these threat actors, or these bad guys. That's how prosecutors talk about the perpetrators. They're bad guys. How do you keep up with them? Because they're always going to stay 10 steps ahead and come up with a new scam, a new con, and so forth. So how do you deal with that from your side as a lawyer with your clients?
Yeah, absolutely. So it's really keeping abreast of any of the new trends. A lot of our partners in this ecosystem that I just mentioned, they'll share their intel that they have with the threat actors if they see certain behaviors and certain trends for some of their scams that they're perpetrating, because there's ebbs and flows with that. Sometimes a year there might be more business email compromises or social engineering, and then it might vacillate into more into ransomware. And into each of those categories, these threat actor groups evolve over time. They change their personnel. So they'll poach bad actors from other threat actor groups and things like that. So you'll see new iterations of the same group, or some of them, maybe you've heard of Lockbit before. They have Lockbit 2.0, 3.0, and it just keeps going on and on as it evolves.
Well, let me ask you this, because
Yeah.
I'm sure some of our listeners may not understand a lot of the technical aspects of it, but there's a very simple question. What is the main threat out there? Is it hackers hacking systems and then demanding money to release the hack or release the information?
I think the business email compromises are probably more prevalent. That's obviously hitting not just corporations, but also individuals. Ransomware, maybe less so for individuals, but the impact there, it's much more salacious, and the impact could be much greater, because as opposed to either perpetrating a wire fraud of a few $100,000 or something, which is no small potatoes, certainly, but that against a ransomware event, that could be 7 or 8 figures.
Well, what is ransomware? Could you explain that to our listeners?
Yeah, so threat actors will typically exploit a vulnerability in an organization. It might be a VPN that's open out to the internet, or perhaps they start with a business email compromise, and they get somebody on staff to click on a link or open an attachment with malicious with malware in it, or entering their credentials to gain access to an attachment or something along those lines. Once the threat actor gets in there, they're going to try to mess with your data. It's not normally modification of the data. It's usually taking of the data, or also in the biz called exfiltration. And that has other legal ramifications we can talk about later. But they can also double extort, where not only do they take the data, but they also encrypt it. So your organization won't be able to use it. You can see it, you can see the file name, but you can't get into it.
Wow.
And they leverage that by saying, hey, if you pay us, X millions of dollars, so in some cases, we'll unlock it with their decryption key, and we hope that they have a decent decryption key in order to do that. And we will delete, we promise as criminals to delete that data and not publish it on the dark web.
So where do you come in these situations? If a client's been attacked that way, how do you handle it?
Yeah, I
In
like that question because I know you had spoken previously with us about your response, like your incident response. So Mark asked, what are the common ones, and you gave us a great answer. What do you guys do when you get that phone call from that client saying this just happened to us? What do you do? That's what I would love to know in case, God forbid, our law firm got hacked like this.
Yeah, so we'll either get a call or an email. Sometimes we're written into insurance policies, or I'll get a call directly from someone, and immediately I'm getting the lay of the land. When did you discover it? What's happened? I want to determine, is this a business email compromise? Is it a ransomware? And that's going to help me decide what vendors do we need to bring to the table immediately. So within the first few minutes, I'm talking with the client about what our immediate next steps are and getting the vendors lined up that I'm thinking need to come into play. And normally that's a forensic investigation firm. And then oftentimes if there's ransomware involved, to have a threat negotiator as well to do, at the very least, intel, hopefully avoiding to do a payment.
So when they make a demand for 10 million or something like that, it's understood that that's going to be negotiated down?
It really is. Yeah, there are some threat actor groups that are incredibly sticky and difficult to work with, and they refuse to negotiate, but the vast majority of them will negotiate to some extent.
Can you find these people?
Oh, that's a question I get from almost every single client. If only we could. Most of these threat actors are in non-extraditable countries like Iran, China, places like that, Russia. So they're operating, maybe not state sanctioned necessarily, but their governments are not going to assist in law enforcement activities to bring them down. That's not to say that they aren't taken down. Every year there's a handful of these organizations that do ultimately fall, and that's in coordination with a whole host of international law enforcement. A lot of times it's because they're leaving their non-extraditable safe country, their bubble, to go on a vacation.
Are they young? Are they typically young?
Yeah, they are. They're typically in their 20s, maybe their early 30s, and they want to go to, the Canary Islands, or I don't know, somewhere you got snagged in a South American country in the last couple of years. So it's usually along those lines. They want to go have sun and fun, and they go a little too far from home.
So I was curious when we've talked about it's a ransom situation. I opened the show. I think you were listening, even though you weren't on screen yet, about that police department that they were all their evidence and cases was locked down. They chose not to pay the ransom. A couple episodes back ago, we had a whole episode on the Savannah Guthrie kidnapping, maybe murder of her mother, and we had a lead detective on the case, and we talked about it. And I mentioned in that show that. Police often tell people don't pay the ransom when you get someone calling you for a ransom, because if you do that, you're just enticing, more criminal behavior. If people think you're going to pay the ransom, they're going to start kidnapping like crazy. It's going to become a real problem, which you see very frequently in South American countries where people are kidnapped, people pay the ransom, and it's a business that just keeps going. And our law enforcement in the U.S., they do not pay ransoms. So what's kind of the status of having ransoms paid in your industry of cyber stalking?
It's gotten so much better. Like, from a practical perspective, there are less payments because individuals and companies are becoming far more savvy. They may get hit, but they have backups that are safely air gapped and things like that, so they don't have to pay. I would say that the policies behind doing that and the personal convictions, almost every entity does not want to, and even law enforcement in some cases will appreciate that there could be a business consideration for doing it. Right. It's easy to say, don't pay bad guys, you're just making it worse for everyone else. But if you have a company with 15 employees that have been there for 30 or 40 years in your family, or you're a larger company where you would have to think about shutting down divisions or speak to shareholders, that kind of thing, that's a different calculation. There's a real human cost that you need to think about. Guthrie is obviously immediate connection there, but there's also that human element when you're talking about the livelihoods of your employees and the health of a business, being able to continue their mission.
Are the ransomware hackers typically one step ahead of everybody else in terms of technical expertise? In other words, can you thwart them by having better systems?
It's a mix. It's a mixed bag. So there are what they call 0-day vulnerabilities, meaning that nobody's had the ability to put out a patch or identify something, so the threat actor gets the first bite at the apple and exploits something nobody knew about. But more commonly, they're vulnerabilities that should be well known or are out there in public, but organizations or individuals don't take the necessary steps to like patch that vulnerability with an update, for example, like when your iPhone or whatever gets a notification to upgrade, they choose not to do it for whatever reason. Or it could be as simple as with the social engineering that I mentioned earlier with business email compromise and things like that, with clicking on links, entering in credentials. That's a human training element, and also perhaps they don't have multi-factor authentication. That's not a fail-safe, but it's one more hurdle for the bad guys. So there's a whole mixed bag about how they can exploit either the personnel or the system or a mix of both in order to perpetrate their exploit.
I hate doing this. I want to bounce back to my Savannah Guthrie, topic. So forgive me for bouncing back here, but that's the beauty of a podcast, very organic. I was thinking about when you were answering the question with, such great information. For some reason, it came to me the idea of, I know people who get in car accidents and then they get sued and they say it's a total shakedown because the person wasn't injured, there was barely a dent on their car, but their insurance is going to pay them $150,000. And they say, and I have no say over that because I don't want them to get a penny, but the insurance is the one making the decision. So do you see that dichotomy as well in your case where insurance steps up? Because I do know there's ransom insurance out there now. So is that something that happens where actually it's the insurance company that makes a decision whether to pay the ransom or not?
That is such an interesting comparison or thought exercise. It's a little different with cybersecurity. Typically, the insurance carriers leave it to the insured to make that decision. If there is coverage for a ransom payment at all, it's up to the insured whether they want to pay that. It's not the situation where the insurer is going to pay or force the payment.
Sure.
They may counsel against it for all the reasons that we talked about, with a criminal and I alluded to it's a criminal, so you may not be able to take their word that they're deleting or not using the data in any way. But there are reasons for businesses to do that, and it is left to be a business decision in consultation with their counsel.
I mean, I know there's kidnapping insurance, for example. So you just referenced if there was insurance. Were you saying if your client, the company, actually purchased the insurance, or does this type of insurance not exist?
It definitely exists.
Okay.
It is in the vast majority of the policies, but there are some insureds that choose not to get that subpart if it is subparted or sublimited on their policy. So they may get, for instance, to give you an example of what would that cover then, they may have coverage for the forensic investigation or the cost of notifying individuals of their data being compromised. But any ransom payment might be out of pocket for that insured because they chose not to pay for coverage for that aspect.
Sure. Okay. I was always wondering, I think we mentioned it earlier before we got online here, about the dark web and how that plays into this world that you practice in.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the dark web is aptly named. It's an interesting and dark and scary place. I have a Master of Science in Cybersecurity, and even when we have projects and things like that, I was not super excited about going in there. I think it's fascinating to see it. I definitely have some really great people in my industry ecosphere that will come in and talk to my students for my incident response class, for example, and their jaws just drop. And I always learn something because it's not. To give a view to the audience that hasn't seen it before, it's not like Google where everything's indexed, where it has a URL and you can look it up and search for it. You know exactly where to go. Right. So it's a little more difficult to navigate in that way. But if you're very savvy in that area, or if you're, for example, a vendor that does dark web monitoring or threat act or negotiations and intel, they know where to go. They know where to look for certain data. If we're looking to see if a client's data has been posted, for instance.
Well, you use the term dark web. I'm sure we have some listeners who don't really know what that is.
That's true.
It sounds very interesting. Could you explain it a little better? Actually, for me too, because I don't know much about it.
Sure.
Oh, Marc, you know everything.
No.
I think maybe some people have heard of a Tor browser or an Onion browser. That's what the dark web is. So it's called Onion browser because there are essentially multiple layers of VPNs. So the idea is to obfuscate where you're located. So you may be in the US, but through a network of these basically like volunteer servers throughout the world that agree to be part of this network, they can obfuscate where this information is going to and coming from. So some people might have even seen American Greed episodes and things of that ilk for Silk Road and the guy that was allegedly behind that and ultimately caught. That sold all sorts of contraband from drugs to kind of weapons. I'm thinking of examples like rocket launchers. Like it was just crazy what you could get on there. But that's how essentially safe that area is for people to do bad acts. There's some good that can be there too. If you're savvy to use it, you're not being tracked by people, your personal information is more secure, things like that. But it's certainly leveraged by the bad guys in a very big way.
And our government cannot pierce it. No government agency can.
Well, it's not necessarily that. It's difficult to track back, but as I mentioned before, when there are multiple global law enforcement entities that are involved, they can use certain tools that I'm not privy to and expertise to track people down. It's not foolproof by any means, but it's incredibly difficult to do.
Yeah. I had a case around 2018 in New York where there were a bunch of Ivy League college students, Mark, and they were hanging out in a hotel partying. And they were all smart kids, obviously. And one of them overdosed and died. And the government used the dark web to determine who, because Blair just mentioned drugs are often available, and they bought the drug. They determined who bought the drugs and gave them, and they prosecuted that. There aren't many cases in the country where the drug dealer, so to speak, although this person wasn't a dealer, they were the supplier, that they got prosecuted. But the government actually did go through the dark web and prove it. I think they got a little bit of a heads up from all the other kids were freaking out and scared, and they all started talking, of course. And so that helped, gave them a little bit of a head start to build their case. So what about, like, are firewalls helpful to prevent these types of attacks? And what can a company do to prevent them?
Oh, absolutely. There are so many tools at the disposal for companies, and it's totally scalable. So a company doesn't have to think that they need to spend to the ends of the earth or always get the newest, greatest, and latest. It really is scalable to your company and what your priorities are. And there are things like endpoint detection and response tools. So these are like think of virus defenders on steroids. So it's not just that they're looking for a certain malicious code that exists. It's also looking for the behaviors. Because one of the things the bad guys will do is once they get in your network, your organization, they're going to live off the land and they're going to move laterally throughout your organization using tools that your staff uses every day. So of course, some of these defense mechanisms aren't going to see that as suspicious behavior, but some of these more evolved EDR tools and the like use AI, they use behaviors, especially if you're using it in conjunction with vendors that are in this space, that they manage it, because they will feed in the intel that they glean on a day-to-day basis in order to augment that index of bad behaviors even more. To give you a really, I think a clear example, or at least I think it's a clear example, is that it will watch for spikes in traffic at weird times. So if Sandy in accounting doesn't normally work at 1 or 2 in the morning, but suddenly you're seeing tons of information, megabytes, gigabytes, or terabytes of information leaving the environment in the middle of the night, those kind of tools can shut that down. They can shut it down and quash it then and there, or you can configure it to deal with it yourself and it alerts somebody. But those are just some of the examples of some tools, and some of the freebies that I would suggest doing just at a base level was making sure that you're doing your patching for the tools that you do have, make sure that's up to date, make sure that you have a good password policy in place. So you're using unique, different passwords. You're not using the same password that you have for Facebook that you've been using from 2006. You're not using variations of it. And that anywhere that you can use multi-factor authentication, you're using that. Because if the threat actor gets your password, is able to figure it out, then that gives them one more hurdle that they need to authenticate that it's them when they try to get in.
Right, Mark, you better change your password. I think it's, don't
The
immediately.
1, 2, 3
I
doesn't
changed
work.
my password so much I can't remember it.
That's because we're getting old.
That's right.
You know, so if we do everything you're saying, well, by the way, I want to say, everyone listening, no one is immune to this risk, right?
Right.
Individuals, elderly, young people, everyone, companies, we're all at risk here. So we really need to pay
I
attention.
actually just want to interject. I had a client who apparently was watching porn, and one day he gets a call, and I guess it was an untraceable call from somebody saying, we've intercepted what you're watching. And I think it was, I don't know if, I think it was gay porn now that I remember. And he was married, and they demanded money. What he did, he didn't do anything.
I've had
And
clients
nothing
where
was published.
Yeah.
I've certainly had clients affected with a similar scam where they might be, the company might be part of a ransomware event. We're dealing with that. And then they start calling the C-suite, typically the CEO, and say, we've got pictures of you. We know what you've been looking at. And more often than not, the CEO is able to say, like, that's not real. We don't have to pay attention to that, but I am worried about media, so I'll counsel them on that and the messaging. But there have been occasions where they pause and you're not really sure if they're actually concerned with that. So you have
This
to put that
client
in.
was.
Yeah. Attorney-client privilege, right? They share with us. Yeah.
Yeah.
If we do all the things that you just recommended, and I'm glad to hear that they are affordable, but let's say you alluded earlier to emailing with somebody, and in our last couple episodes ago when we talked about it, I referenced a friend who's a businessman who paid an invoice, and that, so we do everything, but the person we're communicating with, like let's say it's a vendor that we use, if they're not doing it on their end and they get hacked, or could someone that goes in our system see our banking and actually get into the banking? So what, like, how far will this go if they get into us? If they get into our system, how far can they take it to who we're communicating with?
Yeah, it's part of the success plan in doing this business email compromises is gaining access into the system and then being there for enough time so they can learn conversations. They may learn that you're going on vacation, so they'll mention that in an email where they're asking you, don't send a check, we're only taking wires, send the payment here. I hope you enjoyed Aruba, just to make it even more real. And also making sure that they're contacting the right people, because you may have on your website accounting at blah, blah, blah.
Right.
If everything actually goes to, poor Sandy, I'm going to pick on Sandy again in accounting. If everything goes to Sandy in accounting, they're going to learn that by being in the system. And they hide it by putting in rules. So their emails going back and forth, they'll be deleted before you see them, or things will be moved to subfolders in your Outlook that you wouldn't normally use, like RSS, for example, or a music folder. They'll hide things in there.
Right. So are you seeing any of your clients who, before they sign up with a vendor, putting a requirement on that vendor that they have certain, software and so forth in place to, hopefully assure them that they're not going to get hacked as well?
Oh, absolutely. That's a great question. So when I'm consulting my clients on contracts or doing speaking events about limiting liability and exposure and things of that nature, we really need to think about it from the contractual level, because you could leave a limitation of liability clause out of the contract, which would be a limit to maybe the cost of services for a couple months or the monetary cap. It's usually vastly insufficient to cover the cost of whatever the incident was, like if you're having a ransomware event, for instance, or a wire fraud transfer.
Right.
So you want to talk with a client about that and making sure that will cover it. Maybe you also want to talk about not only limiting liability and exposure in that way, but maybe doing indemnification. So, hey, vendor, if you get breached and you have my data, or I prove that you caused it, you're going to be responsible for the cost of notifying individuals under my direction, something along those lines. Because it's really difficult to prove, like if you have a managed service provider or an outside IT group that you think is at fault, that they didn't do something, it's really hard to prove that it was their fault, or if they didn't do something, how do you prove that you didn't have a meeting during the course of the last year where they made that recommendation and you chose not to follow it?
Right.
It's a gray area, and I definitely have clients that are upset and they want to recover the cost because it's such a huge expense and it's such a headache, but it's really difficult to do that.
Yeah, it sounds like it. I kind of have a curveball thought or question here is in the world of professionals that are members of regulatory associations like us as lawyers, have bar association rules and so forth. Doctors have rules like HIPAA and so forth. If we get hacked, how does that affect us? Someone hacks our law firm, they get privy to attorney-client privileged information. A doctor gets hacked. And actually, the reason it's dawned on me while we've been talking is I did have a doctor call me not that long ago, within the last 2 years for sure. And he was like, hey, what ethically am I supposed to do? Do I have to report it, to the Department of Health and so forth? But I did get hacked.
Patients even.
Yeah, do I have to tell all the patients that, hey, we were hacked? So I imagine with all your experience, you've been in that arena as well. So can you share anything with us about that scenario?
Yeah, absolutely. So a lot of professional organizations, insurance brokers, lawyers, financial industry, healthcare, they can fall under different regulatory schemes or even ethical rules. For lawyers, for example, ABA has a general rule, New York does as well, but honestly, it differs pretty much to what you'd have to follow under the state breach notification statute that you're dealing with notifying clients and such.
Right.
Under healthcare, you have HIPAA to deal with, which is very similar to the state breach notification laws. And if you have to follow that, you might have an exemption under the state laws if you're following a federal rule like HIPAA. But it might have either lower thresholds for triggering notifications. So I talked about acquisition earlier, or taking the data out of the environment. Under HIPAA, it's just access. So if your forensics team sees that they were interacting with patient folders and files or emails with sensitive information, that would trigger a notification under HIPAA. And there could be a whole host of other ones, like Gramm-Leach-Wiley Act for financial institutions, or pretty much anybody that does loans and credit. So it could be an auto dealership or agricultural supplies, things like that. There's a whole host of things that you need to be mindful of. Insurance brokers that I mentioned earlier, or even insurance companies. Some states, their insurance commissioners may require you to report back. They might be under a license, like in New York, and the New York Financial Department. You have to notify them if you hit certain qualifications. So that's another reason to get counsel like me involved, because it can be pretty sticky trying to work your way through which do we have to follow and also when, because most people think you have to notify immediately, and that's not the case at all.
Right.
You have
I wanted
you
to
have an
ask something.
opportunity to determine who's actually been affected.
Okay.
I wanted to ask, I'm sure this must be on someone's mind. It's on my mind, and maybe you have a thought about this. How vulnerable are our bank accounts? How vulnerable are banks to cyber attacks?
Fortunately, I've had some credit unions have some issues. Not necessarily the banks themselves. If they're brought in, it's typically as part of a wire fraud transfer scheme that the money was sent to the wrong bank or the bad actors bank. As far as your financial information, what I would suggest and what I've done myself is, credit monitoring is well and good. If you hear about LifeLock or whatever is provided in those breach notification letters that you get, but that's after the fact. Putting credit freezes on your credit through the free agencies, you just call the number, you go to the website, and it takes a few minutes to do. Experian, for whatever reason, takes a few more minutes than the other ones. But that stops the bad guy from doing something in advance. And just to riff on this, even though this wasn't exactly what you were talking about, but availing yourself of other things like going to the recorder of deeds to make sure somebody doesn't, put their name on your deed, you get an alert that way. It's things along those lines. Being really engaged with your personal information and monitoring it, looking at your credit report on a regular basis, like your credit card app. Mine, for instance, big provider, it has your CreditWise score, and you can access your credit. I look at that probably on a bi-weekly basis, it's certainly every month, just to make sure there's nothing hinky going on.
Right, that makes
Good
sense.
advice.
You know, we're a true crime podcast, so I don't know if you're a true crime fan or not, but if you are, hopefully you start listening to our show. But what Mark and I do is we talk about our crazy ass cases. We change the name of our clients, we change the date and location, but we talk about what went on behind the scenes in the case, why we made strategy decisions, what our client was thinking, what the judge, why they ruled the way they did, what the jurors were doing on the case. And again, for attorney-client privilege and confidentiality, we change everything. We do represent some high-profile cases that are in the news, and on those we'll reference the client's name, and because if you Google it, you're going to find everything we're saying, because we won't reveal any attorney-client privilege. So I'm just wondering if you're comfortable sharing any cases that you worked on that you think our listeners might find interesting.
Oh boy, yeah, pick from the stack. I think one of the ones that I thought was maybe the most complex was a critical industry provider. So think electrical, water, that kind of thing.
Critical.
And it was the CEO who was the attack vector. He clicked on some things and also somehow had his cell phone SIM card swapped out.
Ooh.
So the threat actor was able to do the multi-factor authentication that I talked about earlier.
Right.
They were able to verify that they were okay to enter into that system. So there was multiple levels of issues there, and with access, but also the fact that when it came to work things where you can have multi-factor authentication, and something that I see a lot of my C-suite clients do is they don't have time to do multi-factor authentication. They may have it for the rest of the organization, but they don't do it.
Yep.
And then they end up being the weakest link. Like that's the one that they're going to go for, and they have easy access. With the SIM card swap, having access to everything on your phone,
Wow.
all of your personal communications, which became a really big problem.
That was a physical swap?
They great question. So they will call your phone company and social engineer their way into your account. So they'll say, hey, this is Mark's wife. He's traveling. He doesn't have access to phone. I really need you to do this for me. And they'll allow access. So I told you about getting your accounts locked down. Call your phone provider as well and make sure that you have that SIM swap fraud in place. So you have to go through other mechanisms in order to prove your identity.
I'm writing that down right now.
Wow.
Seriously, Mark, we got to do
Yeah.
that.
What do we call that?
SIM.
When you call your provider, just tell them you want protection from SIM swap, and they'll whatever
SIM
they
swap.
call it,
SIM.
they'll walk you through the process. Again, just like with your credit freeze, it just takes a few minutes. It was not a big deal to do.
Wow.
So highly recommend that. 'Cause
Yeah.
that can be
Take-
that can be big.
Good advice.
Take a few minutes to save a lot of money, aggravation, and time for
Right.
sure. Right?
Yeah, embarrassment too, because I mean, how much do you have on your phone? And for this individual, he had things that he probably shouldn't have had on his phone, so that was leveraged against him and his company. And then some data from other, being in that realm, also being on boards, things like that. He had information from other organizations on there, so now we had to explain to those individuals why that data was there, things like that.
Right.
So
I wanted to ask you, when ransom is paid, how is it usually paid? I know that, that's one of the areas that law enforcement uses to catch the threat person. But I've heard that in a lot of cases now they're using Bitcoins and
Yep.
other forms of payment. What have you observed about that?
yeah, the cryptocurrency is the ultimate way to go. I've only had one client that almost put cash in a fast food bag in a garbage can.
It's like the movie.
Everybody else, it's been cryptocurrency, and it's typically Bitcoin. And the reason for that is for a little while, threat actors wanted us to use something called Monero, and that was a couple of years ago. So there's other versions of it too, but in their minds, they thought it was less traceable. Because there are some tracing mechanisms. You might not exactly find out where they're from, but one of the things that you have to be really cognizant of when you're paying these bad guys is going through the process of like an OFAC check with the government and make sure you're not paying a sanctioned entity. There are bad guys, and then there are really bad guys. So you want to make sure that you're not paying a terrorist, and you can prove that you did your due diligence. And that's also not the individual, not the company that's doing it. I would highly recommend, and it's my practice, to have a vendor that does that process and can stand behind their due diligence documents. So if you have insurance and if they're covering your ransom payment, they're going to require you to do that anyway.
So are you personally, as counsel for the victim, doing these negotiations, or are you talking with the bad actor?
That's really evolved over the last few years. So many years ago, maybe not that many years ago, it would be the attorney, but there's a vendor that will do that, the threat actor negotiator. So day in and day out, that's what they do. There's some really great benefits to that because they really weirdly can not necessarily build a rapport with a bad guy, but they know who they've dealt with, like their phrasing, the times of night and day that they get on, with what threat actor group they say they're affiliated with, and they'll pretend they don't tell you that they're threat actor negotiators, or tell as if you're the bad guy, sharing the bad guy, but they'll do the back and forth. We still look at the messages and we may want to do some tweaking to it, but we let the threat actor negotiator handle that. And ultimately, they're usually also the ones that are the payment facilitator and also doing that sanctions check we talked about earlier.
Yeah, so it sounds, if I understood you correctly, that the negotiator with the perpetrator thinks they're part of the victim, they're an employee or the lawyer for the victim, so they don't realize that they're negotiating with a professional, almost like a kidnap expert, for law enforcement, a hostage expert who's a hostage negotiator, and it makes sense to have someone who's fully trained in that area. They don't train us that in law school. I don't think, Marc, I took a class in hostage negotiating or cybersecurity, ransom negotiating.
I may have, but I didn't go.
Yeah, you didn't go to class. Well, that's because you're so smart. You just show up for the exam and you aced everything. Talking about paying the ransom, Marc asked that question a few minutes ago, like how you pay Bitcoin. The follow-up question that I have along those lines, Marc, is, the expression, there's no honor among thieves.
Right.
So I want to ask Blair, how often does the ransom get paid where you actually get what you're paying for? Is it 100%, or do you sometimes pay and they don't release the information?
It's another good question. Slightly south of 100%. In the vast majority of cases, the threat actor will honor or attempt to honor the promise for the payment. Sometimes the decryption key does not work or doesn't work well, and they will have, in quote unquote, their customer service representative assist you and try to work out the kinks. But I've definitely had companies that have paid 7 figures and the decryption key was junk, or they just didn't get anything back from them.
Wow.
And there is no recourse.
Yeah, they don't refund the money, do they?
No. For the vast majority of these groups, they leverage what they call their business reputation, and they'll even mention that in the negotiation.
That makes sense, actually. Yeah, that makes perfect
They
sense.
say call all these other victims. They'll tell you that
Right. Here's our Yelp review.
Yeah, I restore.
I mean, it really happens that way. So if there's a group that I know that isn't going to pay, or that threat intel vendor that I'm talking about, they'll be like, we don't recommend you pay because 9 out of 10 times they ghost you after you make the payment, or their subscription fees junk, and then they're not going to live very long because as a threat actor group, because the word gets out.
Right, that's incredible. I've enjoyed this so much, Marc. I'm wondering if you want to wrap it up with some, because we don't know your field, you know it inside and out. Are there topics that you think our listeners would be interested in that you kind of want to just?
Yeah, that's of interest to our true crime listeners and something that we haven't touched upon. Yeah. We'd love to hear it. You're the expert.
I'm sorry, my connection broke up. Can you repeat that question?
I was just saying, as we wrap up, we don't know your industry as well as you do. So is there anything that we haven't touched on that you think our listeners would love to hear from you on in regard?
I think usually the things people are interested in is what can I do on a personal level? And I think vigilance, certainly, the busier you are, is when you need to be more vigilant, because threat actors will take advantage of that around tax time. They love that around holidays, things like that. Just if you have any question in your mind, verify it, and don't verify it from the phone number that was provided in the email asking to send money, or that respond back to that email. Independently verify that this person is the one that sent you something. Because these scams, look incredibly real. You're never again going to see an email from a Nigerian prince
Right.
wanting to give you money. I mean, these look incredibly legit. So just be incredibly cautious. Make sure you put all these things into place that I talked about with credit freezes, your passwords, your MFA. Do what you can to protect yourself.
I think that is obviously amazing advice, and it will be implemented by people who are still thinking clearly and they're sharp and intelligent. But I get very concerned about our vulnerable elderly. You know, when these things first started happening, it was mostly the elderly who were getting scammed. They're not thinking clearly. No one's in the room with them to say, oh, that doesn't sound right. And I don't know if there's anything, you know, that you can shed any light or advice on that population.
Yeah, I think those stories can be particularly heartbreaking.
They are.
Because they will definitely exploit maybe a little lady living by herself that, you know, you need to go get me gift cards right away, or you're not going to get your computer information back, whatever the scam is. I think in those cases, what it really comes down to is friends and family having that conversation with their loved ones that could be more vulnerable than others on a regular basis.
Right.
And maybe if you're able to, if this person is in such a position of maybe a little bit diminished capacity or willing to have you help them, put those things in place on their behalf. You know, contact their phone company, for instance, for that SIM swapping protection, making sure they have credit freeze, things like that.
You are so right about engaging the family, because I had over the years of the few calls I've gotten about an elderly being scammed this way, it's when they've lost everything and then the family gets involved. Right. And I think if they'd only been more engaged with their loved one over the last couple of years, they could have notified the bank, could have notified their cell phone provider, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So that's something I'm going to keep in mind for my friends and so forth, and the listeners hopefully heed that advice. As we wrap this up, I do want to say that everyone who's listening and heard me give all the initials after your name, if they've been watching this on YouTube, watching the video, they saw 100 diplomas behind you. So they know that I wasn't making that up, that you really do have all those degrees. Very, very impressive. Even without all of that, clearly from your testimony today during this podcast.
Oh, we got a Senate committee, a testimony?
Yes, she's testifying. We swore her in, didn't we? Oh, shoot.
No,
we forgot.
didn't.
We got to retape the whole episode, Blair. I'm sorry. We forgot to swear you in. Well, but it was really awesome. You are the best.
I am impressed and in awe of your ability, and more importantly, thank you for educating not only our listeners, but us.
Yeah.
I'm running out right now to take care of these things.
Yeah.
Please do.
SIM swap.
Swim
swap. Yeah.
Sounds good anyway.
Yeah. Well, thank you.
Thank you so much
You're
for
welcome.
having me.
We really enjoyed it. Thank you so much.
We're gonna sign off in a second. We like to remind our listeners and our viewers to like, follow, and subscribe. And then, Marc, how do we?
We always do the same thing. It's consistent with our theme. Till the next time, ladies and gentlemen, you're free to go.
You're Free to Go is sponsored by Milburn Men's Clothing, where top athletes shop for sharp, tailored style. And whether Marc and I are in the studio or the courtroom, Milburn dresses us for success. Mention YFTG and get 10% off at Milburn Men's Clothing, which has been providing the finest in men's clothing and suits since 1946. Call 651-645-2922 or visit www.milburn.com. Everything expressed and discussed in this episode are the opinions and experiences of attorneys Guy Fronstin and Marc Nurik and their guests. All ethical rules are complied with. Attorney-client privilege and confidential information is not shared or released during these episodes, and names, dates, locations, and other identifying information may be changed to protect confidentiality. Topics are embellished, and none of the statements made constitute legal advice and should not be considered or relied on as such.